Yes?
In other talks, you mentioned how Russia exported communism and atheism to the United States, to colleges. Could you?
Oh, yes. I spoke to, I spoke with, when I was in college, I went to Thomas Aquinas College. Absolutely great place. Unbelievable. I was in the first class. And at one point we talked to a professor who had been in Germany, had been a professor in Germany, and he said he was there in East Berlin at the end of the Second World War, and they had a lecture from the KGB on how the KGB had a big plan to come into the United States and introduce drugs into the colleges and universities among the students to soften up the culture and to soften up those who were being the educated class in America with drugs. And he said, that's what's going on. Father Walter Ciszek, I'm sure some of you have heard of Father Walter Ciszek, though around the country I'm amazed at people who don't. My wife and I knew him personally. He celebrated our wedding. He was marvelous. He told us all kinds of stories that weren't written down about things that went on. He said when he was in Siberia, he ran into a man who he had seen in Rome when he was there studying in the Russicum, and this man had been a Jesuit seminarian. And he said, what are you doing in Siberia? And the guy said, this is my punishment for getting kicked out of the Jesuit seminary. He was a communist agent whose job was to become a Catholic priest. I told a priest that just a few months ago over in the Erie Diocese, and he said, oh yeah, we had a couple of them kicked out of Mundelein Seminary at the same time. They were uncovered that they were communists and they were kicked out. When I went to Thomas Aquinas College, we shared the campus. We rented from a Claretian seminary, and for the first few years before we found our own permanent campus. The seminarians were bad people. They were immoral, they were irreligious. They had a pyx there they used as an ashtray. And I mean, they're constantly blasphemous language and everything. Their rector was a playboy. You know, the sunglasses all the time and the sports car, and the girlfriend, the rector who was leading the seminary. There were two of them who had the faith, and they snuck over at night to talk with us to get some support from believing Catholics, and they said they had to mask the fact that they believed the faith or they wouldn't get ordained, and they thought that it was important for the order that believing Catholic get ordained to the priesthood. But there was a guy named Ron Tangen, 1970, got out of the Air Force. He and his roommate went all over the United States to seminaries to find out there was a good seminary they could go to. It was 1970, and they asked three questions of the seminarians. Do you believe in heaven? Do you believe in hell? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God? They couldn't find any seminarians in any of the seminaries. They didn't talk to all the seminaries. Any of them they talked to in any of the seminaries who would say yes to all three questions. And then they found a seminary, Brother Gino's seminary over there in Italy. They found that. They were the ones that got Americans to come over there and form. I think it's the Oblates of the Virgin Mary. And they're the ones that got the Americans to take over that order and renew it. And they discovered they really had the faith over there. But this was like 1971 when I met the Claretian seminaries, and I realized one thing that people just aren't aware of. A lot of our priests may have come in as communist agents or as 60s liberals. These guys who didn't believe the faith, even the guys here at the Claretian Seminary, if you asked them, why do you want to be a priest if you don't believe the Catholic teaching? They wanted the power, and they wanted to change the Catholic Church. So when I hear these troubles going on of priests, failing in their responsibilities, everybody's saying, oh, the poor priests, what happened? I don't know that they were real priests when they came in. That they weren't the subverters who were there to cause trouble in the church, to embarrass the church. It's always something to keep in mind when you hear about a priest doing something. Maybe he was one of those agents or one of those radicals who came in to change the church, not to spread the faith. These guys never go to confession. Father Ciszek told me that he was speaking to a famous Jesuit retreat master that came over to Fordham University, and Father Ciszek attended his retreat, and then he heard that Father Ciszek was there at his retreat, so he went to see Father Ciszek afterwards, and he said, well, what do you think of my retreat? And Father said, well, you know, it had a lot of good points, but I'm confused about, I didn't hear anything about confession. And Father told us, he said, oh, well, I don't, you know, the way my retreat is set up, we don't need to talk about confession. And Father told us that he said to him, well, that's interesting, let's talk about that. So they talked about that for a while, and then he found out, Father admitted that he hadn't been to confession in 10 years. And Father Ciszek said, oh, no, that's interesting, let's talk about that. So they talked about that for a while, and he said after about 20 minutes talking about that, the retreat master was on his knees going to confession. And he said he needed it. He needed it. So it's another problem in the church. The priests stopped going to confession. Not all of them, but the ones who are causing the trouble. They stopped going to confession. They started kidding themselves that they didn't commit mortal sins when they never used the sacraments. So that's a big part. But the good news is, last week in Fatima, Pope Benedict showed his wisdom again, his brilliance. He consecrated in front of Our Lady's primary image of Fatima the hearts of all the priests in the church to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. That's going to have a great effect. So we should see some good news here and see some things turning around. What we got to do is our part is the suffering. That's the thing. We've been doing a lot of praying. We've been doing our rosaries. We've got to offer the suffering. And it's just the suffering we're going to come to anyway. Then as we get a little spiritually developed, we can start fasting and abstaining and doing other things for sinners. But just start out with what we've already got. So Our Lady came down, and first thing she did was she sent an angel. The angel didn't come with a whole plan of everything that we had to do. The angel plan was simple. It was for beginners. And this is what we're doing all over the country. We're telling everybody the first thing that everybody has to do. The angel said, pray. First of all, he showed the children an image of the Eucharist. He held the Eucharist up in the air before, not an image, but the actual Eucharist, the air before them, and he worshipped to reinforce our belief in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And then he said, to bring peace on the nation, pray and sacrifice yourself for sinners. This is what Our Lady said to the children when she showed them the vision of hell, with the souls falling into hell like the leaves from a tree. She said, pray and sacrifice yourself for sinners so they will not be lost, but will be converted and saved. Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me. And we often puzzle about what that really means. And we have different ideas of what that really means. This is what that means. If we are in the state of grace and baptized, all of the suffering that comes to us has tremendous power. Because Jesus is in us. Whatever happens to us when we're in the state of grace happens to him. And if we willingly accept suffering and offer it to God, it's him extending the suffering on the cross. So our mission, if we're baptized, is to be an extension of Jesus down through history for those who have rejected his sacrifice on the cross. He can't come back and suffer again. We suffer. It's right there in the message of Fatima. And telling everybody that we've got to now start offering the suffering. Fortunately, the angel made it easy. He just said, whatever you're going to encounter anyway, offer it up. It's a real way to peace, if you think about it. If your family, everybody in your family should decide that from now on, we're not going to take offense by anything that anybody else does in the family to me. No matter what they do, I will offer it up for the salvation of souls. Every frustration, every irritation, every disappointment gets offered up. Suddenly, you've got peace in the family, peace in your parish, peace in the workplace. I gave this talk to a nursing center, and they were just thrilled. They told me afterwards, reported back to me, that every time somebody complained, everybody would turn around and say, offer it up! And they'd all laugh, and the person would immediately offer it up. So they suddenly had extraordinary peace in their nursing center, because everybody was concentrating on not complaining. But that's what I say to the kids. What the angel said is, stop complaining. Stop complaining. Every time you feel like complaining, offer it up. Pope Benedict said in his encyclical on hope, we have to start offering it up again. The great practice of the church of 50 years ago, of always offering it up. The nuns taught us that. Throughout the church, everybody taught by nuns was taught to offer it up, and it's been lost. And he said, it could all be restored. It's a great work. It's grueling, it's difficult, it's tiring, but when you see the people coming down and their faith being renewed, and also that we're saving the country, we're right at the edge of disaster, as you all know, and we suddenly discovered the key, and the key is suffering, and at the very first level, it's just what we're going to suffer anyway. We discovered that 1.5 years ago, and we came up with this prayer to get everybody to focus every day on offering all our suffering. I'm sure you haven't encountered that before, you haven't heard about that. It's right there in Fatima, but we hadn't been doing it. So what we did was focused our suffering from now on.